Welcome to Booked, where two guys tell you about the books they're reading. I'm Rob Olson.
And I'm Livius Dunn. This week, we are going to be reviewing The Hunger by Alma Katsu. As part of our desire to read and review all 5 Bram Stoker Novel of the Year nominees.
Yeah.
They're nominees at this point, right? Yeah, they're nominees. They do that weird thing. What's the thing they do before they have the nominees? They have...
they have a preliminary... What is it?
It's not the preliminary ballot.
Yeah.
Yep. So these are the actual nominees. As of right now, Rob and I have read 4 of the 5 nominees. And tonight we're going to tell you a little bit about The Hunger. Here is the bio for Alma Katsu. She is the author of The Taker, The Reckoning, and The Descent. She has been a signature reviewer for Publishers Weekly and a contributor to the Huffington Post. She is a graduate of the Master's Writing Program at the Johns Hopkins University and received her bachelor's degree from Brandeis University. Prior to the publication of her first novel, Katsu had a long career as a senior intelligence analyst for several U.S. agencies and is currently a senior analyst for a think tank. She lives outside Washington, D.C. with her husband. It's pretty impressive.
That's, yeah. That'll be interesting to, I didn't really think about it as I was reading this book, but, as we're talking about what happens in this book, it'll be interesting to kind of reconcile the fact that she's been a senior intelligence analyst with, the type of writing we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, she's got some insight, some previously unreleased...
some intel, yeah.
Donner Party stuff. Spoiler, This book's about the Donner Party.
You said that we've read 4 out of the 5 books on the ballot. Just did some quick math on that while you're reading the bio. That's 80%.
That is... I will check while you give people a synopsis.
All right, so here's the synopsis. Buckle up. It's a long one, and we all know I don't do very well with that, so here we go. Evil is invisible, and it is everywhere. That is the only way to explain the series of misfortunes that have plagued the wagon train known as the Donner Party. Depleted rations, bitter quarrels, and the mysterious death of a little boy have driven the isolated travelers to the brink of madness. Though they dream of what awaits them in the West, long-buried secrets begin to emerge, and dissent among them escalates to the point of murder and chaos. They cannot seem to escape tragedy, or the feeling that someone or something is stalking them. Whether it's a curse from the beautiful Tamsin Donner, who some think might be a witch, their ill-advised choice of route through uncharted terrain, or just plain bad luck, the 90 men, women, and children of the Donner Party are heading into one of the deadliest and most disastrous Western adventures in American history. As members of the group begin to disappear, the survivors start to wonder if there's really something disturbing and hungry waiting for them in the mountains, and whether the evil that has unfolded around them may have in fact been growing within them all along. Effortlessly combining the supernatural and the historical, The Hunger is an eerie, thrilling look at the volatility of human nature pushed to its breaking point.
I'm going to start by saying that it's a courageous undertaking to take something as well-known as the Donner Party and then write historical fiction.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure by definition what historical fiction is, because this obviously takes some liberties as we talk about the supernatural. You know what I mean? So there's historical fiction, here's real people, here's some events, and here's what we think happened around it, and it tries to kind of follow a very rigid retelling of the story, just in that fictional way. And what genre it is when you're adding a supernatural element to it. So, but I do have to say, you could also have written a book and it would have been less courageous to be oh, here are some settlers who are trying to get to California and here's some bad shit that happened to them. That it wouldn't be under the same historical scrutiny as something as well known as the Donner Party. So I applaud her for undertaking the, going the brave route and trying to tackle something that, even as little kids, we knew about, right? Cannibalism came up and Donner Party was the first thing that you thought of.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be weird if it was the Bonner Party or something like that. Something.
The Bonner Party. Yeah. Yeah. So,
So I'll say right up front that there's probably not much of this book that we can talk about, just because, spoilers and stuff like that. And the stuff we can talk about is very rooted in historical, the register of history. So It'll be interesting to see what we what we do before we go into spoiler talk.
For sure. Yeah, we start off, we're on the road with a cast of roughly, I think it's 80, 90 travelers, of which we're, only like 30 of them are named, it seems. 30 of them are named. So I know I don't do well, so I actually had to like write down who people were to kind of keep track of this. But there are a main cast of characters that I would say is a dozen people deep, right?
Yeah, easily.
Mm-hmm. So obviously there's the Donner family. That the primary characters in that Donner family, the ones that we're exposed to, are George Donner, who is we'll call the head of the family and a fairly rich dude that's taking his family across country. His wife Tamsin, which on my notes says Tamsin Dinner. This is autocorrect because I was doing all this from my phone as I was reading that, so I'm going to go ahead and correct that so I don't call her Tamsin Dinner. Although in this book, any one of these people could have been named Dinner.
Wow. I was about to...
Yeah.
You went the cannibalism route. I was about to make a joke about when I don't feel like cooking, I have one of those Tamsin dinners, but you took it a much darker route.
Jacob, who is George's brother and kind of takes that secondary role in the family. Tamsin, I mentioned this is George's wife, but not his first wife. And Alitha Donner is probably the only other Donner character of kind of importance to the story. There are other kids, other children in the family and stuff, but these are really the main ones that we see. They see the story through their eyes in some way.
And I guess that's as good a time as any for me to make one of my first observations about. I'm guessing it was just like how people were at the time, but like. Here, you already mentioned that there's, I think, roughly 90 people in this whole party that's traveling to California from Missouri, and there's so many kids. Like, there's so many kids, and I think there's one of the families was a mother who was a widow who was just her and her kids, and I think she had 13 kids.
That sounds correct, and yeah, but she was very matriarchal. Like she was one of the toughest women in the party because she had to be the the front runner in her family. Like in a lot of cases, and we do have some women. Tamsin is probably one of the most interesting characters in this story, but most of the other women, they're typically described as kind of cowing behind their husbands, which for the time is probably fairly accurate. And I wish I could remember that lady's name because she had a really interesting name too. But yeah, she was kind of a badass. I pictured kind of a larger woman, kind of swatting at kids and kind of taking on the men folk. By the way, they left from Springfield, right? Was it Missouri or was it Illinois?
They left from Independence, Missouri. However,
I gotcha.
Like the actual expedition left from Independence, Missouri, but I think a lot of the people originally lived in Springfield, Illinois.
Cool.
So
I started thinking there's a Springfield, Missouri too, so I was wondering in my head if I was thinking Illinois, but yeah.
Well, that's The Simpsons. Like, there's a Springfield in every fucking state, kind of thing.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Some of the other characters, and we'll kind of run through some of these pretty quickly. Charles Stanton is probably the closest thing we have to a main character in this book, and he's traveling solo, and he's got some things in his past. One particular thing that kind of haunts him through the course of this story, and it's a relationship that he was involved in, but it kind of colors some of his interactions with people. There is Mary Graves, who becomes the object of Stanton's affections, and also a more hip character in this. Like, there are characters who start to see what's happening ahead of what happens, and Mary would definitely fall in that category. There's Edwin Bryant, who's a newspaper man, who's a pretty good friend of Stanton's. James Reed, another large business owner and fairly well-to-do gentleman in his family. At one point, they pick up Thomas, who is a younger Indian, American Indian, who was paid at one point to be a guide. And that's pretty much the main cast, although, as I said, there are at least 15 other named characters that in some cases serve important roles, but, it's kind of like their role comes up and then they're done. And, you kind of move away from them.
Yes, and so story-wise, plot-wise, as research, I guess I'm putting this in air quotes, you can't see. I did read the Wikipedia article for the Donner Party event in American history, just to see, what the similarities to the real history of the Donner Party was. And so a lot of the story itself follows kind of the historical beats of what happens, and the characters are people who actually existed and stuff like that. So I'm guessing that the story is starting out very much like the actual adventure did, with a kind of very, I guess you could say, like lackadaisical adventure through like the Midwest in the beginning, where they were, I get very optimistic and not super careful about rations and keeping time, and they weren't taking it as seriously as maybe other parties who had done long distance travel in the past had. And so the beginning of the book is very casual as far as the traveling goes, stopping for days and blah blah blah, that kind of thing. But very early on in the book, the tragedy strikes in the fact that a boy goes missing, and that in and of itself, with like 90 people back in that day when there was like wild animals and stuff, you probably expected to lose some people along the way. But it's when they find the boy that it starts to get disturbing.
Yeah, and I think Rob's right. There is a thread throughout the book that's, here's like the normal trials and tribulations of crossing the country at that time, in that era, and the challenges that come across. And then every now and then there's a little bit of weird shit sprinkled in, right? Like, so what Rob didn't say is that boy goes missing and they find him, but it definitely does not appear to be how a normal animal would have attacked and killed this child. So like some questions start to come up, but people are like, no, it was probably wolves, and then you go on and they move on and they cover a lot of other miles. And then there's like weird things in the tree, almost look like a person, but it was probably just wolves, so you get this really kind of slow build up into the, call it, because it's mentioned in the synopsis, the more supernatural elements that come into play in the story.
I think one thing that I appreciate about the way this story is told is that the supernatural stuff is introduced gradually, and it kind of intensifies as the peril of the journey kind of intensifies too, as if like the more unsure their fate is, the more trouble they experience from a supernatural perspective. But the first sign of things aren't what they should be, like Livius was saying with this boy and how it didn't look like a regular animal attack, was that the boy goes missing, and several miles down the road is where they encounter his remains, which you wouldn't imagine. Like, either that means that basically like whatever was doing this to the boy either was keeping pace with them or was going ahead of them or something like that, which didn't seem like a normal animal would do. Like, they would just like take the boy, do their business, and move on, not take the boy and like move down the road and then do their business. So it started to raise question marks early on, but in a very subtle way. Yeah,
I mean, one of the things this book did really well, I think, was kind of building up the anticipation of some potential reveal / showdown, right? The other thing it did really well is I think that she did a great job in like looking at relationships. So like I said, as I indicated, right, like you kind of got like where everybody's standing was and what the expectations were in that time of, a businessman with money is the one that's in charge. You've got the husbands that are the head of the family and making all the decisions. But then you have stronger female characters that either in some cases push back against that or circumvent. In Tamsin's case, she kind of does what she wants, but you also have like relationships, right? We mentioned Stanton and Mary Graves and their kind of budding relationship through this. But then there's other things too that I don't know, like how I want to phrase this. There are elements of things that so if someone wrote a book about the Donner Party like 6 months after the event, like you wouldn't have covered. And some of these, I'm not sure how many of them are historically accurate or not, but like there's a character who comes to terms with the fact that he's gay, or he's trying to come to terms with it, you know. So there's that sprinkled in there for a little bit more of a reality feel to it. There is, you know, hints and allusions to, you know, child molestation and young brides and all the things that I don't know if we were reading this story written 100 years ago, would we have gotten those things? And again, I'm not sure how historically accurate they are, but it was interspersed in there in a way that made you feel like the characters were being fleshed out as more than just people traveling, right? So, you know, on the surface, it's commandeering, you know, father, head of the family, cowed wife, whatever, you know what I mean? But you really got like a deeper look into these people. And I think that she did a good job developing those main, you know, we'll say 8 to 10 characters, where she gave them a lot of depth and didn't just make them, you know, settlers on the road.
Yeah, and some of that was just done in the moment where characters are talking about stuff, and other times, kind of laced throughout the book, were like flashback chapters where an entire chapter was a longer exploration of a specific kind of skeleton in someone's closet from their past, where we go back to, I mean, some points even like 5 or 6 years in the past, where it's a chapter about, like Livius was saying, the character who is coming to terms with being gay, like that has a flashback chapter. Some of the darker things in Charles Stanton's past has a flashback chapter to it. The Tamsin Donner character, and so you get some pure like story fortification from these flashback chapters, while other parts are just kind of casually revealed in the moment, kind of dialogue and stuff like that. But that definitely did build the story to be more than just a retelling of a really fucked up historical event, and I really appreciated that. In the afterword, the author did say that she did take, I don't remember her exact words, but basically like some serious liberties with the story in order to build it into the narrative that she wanted it to be. And so she's even acknowledging that, like, you know, she's fabricating a lot of stuff, but anybody who's familiar with the story will see how much of it actually still rooted in like the history of the journey. So yeah, well balanced, I think, and she did a good job of pacing that character development and threading it into the plot.
I don't want to take us out of talking about this, but what the hell is a teamster? I wanted to look that up because I thought that was just like the union kind of thing, but they did definitely mention that there were teamsters. So
yeah, I don't know. I mean, that might merit Googling.
No, here we go. Originally, the term teamster referred to a person who drove a team of draft animals, usually a wagon drawn by oxen, horses, or mules. It's the common. This term was common by the time of the Mexican-American War in 1848 and the Indian Wars throughout the 19th and early 20th century on the American frontier. So there you go. It caught me really off guard the first time I read it, because I was just picturing
like a union worker,
like the pipe layers union or something. Like, I'm not sure exactly who the Teamsters union is, but yeah, it was kind of it caught me off guard, and I figured there had to be a different description. It just I never got around looking it up till now. So yeah, Teamsters, totally Teamsters in this book.
So, plot wise, the story follows pretty faithfully the actual like events of the Donner Party, and one of the most tragic things is they had counted on this dude whose last name is Hastings, who basically had said, hey, I know everybody that's trying to go west has been going in this one kind of established particular route, but I discovered this other way that will save you, I think it's like 150 miles or something like that of travel. And he basically said, like, this is my route, this is the way to go. And the whole Donner Party had set out and established their loose timeline based on how that alternate route was going to kind of assist their journey. At least that's kind of what you come to learn. But then as they start to face some hardships and stuff like that, it becomes clear that maybe it wasn't the right choice. And that's part of history, but it's also like a pretty crucial changing point in the story when things really start to go bad.
Yeah. And no surprise, I think everybody knows how the story ends, right? I mean, for the most part, like the Donner Party.
Yeah, with those Tamsin dinners that I really enjoy.
Yeah, no kidding, man. Yeah, that's it, plot-wise. That's all we can talk about. I mean, they encounter... I shouldn't say they encounter. One character splits off from the group, so we get some information from Edwin Bryant, who goes off kind of in search of... It's like Indian folklore, really, right? Like he wants to meet this tribe, and in his travels, we start to find out some things about the supernatural elements that are impacting the Donner Party that he split off from. So that pretty much covers everything we can talk about, I think, from a plot standpoint. Are there any other characters or any other themes you want to cover before we do spoiler talk?
Well, there's one kind of general notion that you got close to talking about before that one of the things that had come up multiple times throughout reading this story was my thought of how much, I don't want to say it mob mentality, but like kind of a viral thought. Like perception was absolutely reality back in the day, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So people who, like, even in the synopsis, it said that she's suspected of Tamsin Donner is suspected of being a witch, and like a lot of people just avoid her because they, because people are it's a rumor, then there's got to be something to it, and then as weird stuff starts to happen, it's easier to blame her because she's suspected to be a witch, and so that's obviously got to be the thing. And so like back in these days, the truth wasn't necessarily as important to people as just like what seemed like it, the explanation that most people were gathering around. Is that accurate?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of thoughts on that. So my first thought is I totally agree with you, right? Like just this mentality. And at the time, people, that's not too far removed a time from like witch trials.
Yeah.
Right? Where not just like you gossiped about someone maybe being a witch, like people actually acted on it. But in the course of this book, the interesting thing is that we know there's a supernatural element that you and I are not talking about, right?
Right.
But there's a character, and because it happens really early on, I want to talk about Elitha, who is George Donner's daughter by his first marriage, if I remember correctly, right?
Yes, she's one of the older kids, yeah.
Yep. She can hear ghosts.
Yep, straight up.
So I know I just threw that out there, but it happens pretty early on, and it's not in the course of the book. I'll say that it's accurate because the things that she hears are warnings of things that do actually happen. So the reason I bring this up is in this particular instance, which isn't something I thought about until you started talking about that, essentially I'm just paraphrasing, right? Like it's kind of silly. They all thought she was a witch. If there's someone that hears ghosts in the course of the story, is it really that unbelievable that Tamsin could be a witch? And this is the part, when you add a supernatural element to a historical tale, does that then change the perception, right? Because now, so let's take this a different route. If we have that information in the course of the story, that's canon, and it's true that she can hear or talk to dead people or whatever you want to say it. Then if 4 chapters later, like Tamsin curses somebody and something bad happens to them, do we find it as implausible as if we read that in a straight up 100% historically accurate account?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll give, I didn't give the example that I was thinking of because it maybe spoils things a little bit, but the other example is just like Stanton's past and how like he basically got dealt a bad card because a rich guy did a bad thing, but he was rich enough to make people believe that Stanton did the bad thing.
Yeah.
And then there was nothing that Stanton could do about it because that's just, people believed it.
I don't want to give anything away, but Stanton's interesting because I understand like his whole I don't want to take this offline. Maybe we'll talk about it in spoiler talk. But like, I get why he played along, and like his guilt, not just at the event that happened, but like how the rest of it went down.
Yeah, that's probably a spoiler talk thing, but
yep.
Yeah. So I guess that's kind of my thing is like, if I wanted to get Livius in trouble, I would put one of my belongings in his, his wagon or whatever, and I'd call him a thief. And because my belonging was in his wagon, everybody would be like, "Oh yeah, he's a thief." And that played a pretty big part in the way that people acted, because you can't just be like, "Well, I'm not hanging out with you guys anymore." You're in the middle of like nowhere.
That's a good point.
You just got to kind of do what you can to survive. Also, you're not a thief. You never put anything of mine in your wagon.
Not that you're aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's go over to spoiler talk. I think there's some things, both plot wise, that merit discussion, and then I have some. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Some questions about the approach to this book. So for those of you that are uninitiated, patreon.com/booked. It's where we put spoiler talk. It's where we talk about all those parts. We dance around in these reviews, which is so weird because we went so many years without doing spoiler talk. And I'm really glad that we do it. But I always feel like we're doing spoiler talks. People, no, look, if you want to go donate, that's cool. $1 a month gets you spoiler talk and our gratitude. And if you don't, that's cool too. But at least it gives us a place to talk about these things, which then helps me, and I think sometimes Rob, kind of form our overall idea, and sometimes can change, even my rating on a book based on conversation we have. So we're going to go do that now, and we'll be back momentarily.
All right, we are back from spoiler talk, where we talked a lot about spoilers and hashed out some thoughts. And yeah, this is just one of those books that we can't talk about much of the important stuff. So like, if you want to know the deeper, like, you're going to hear stuff in our wrap-ups and you're going to be like, where did that come from? We talked a lot in spoiler talk about the things that probably helped solidify our feelings about this. So once again, not to belabor a point, patreon.com/booked, $1 a month, really not anything big. And I'll say it again every now and then. I say, hey, this gets you all of our spoiler talk from as long as we've been doing it, which is dozens of books. So that first $1, that first month, you're getting a hell of a value if you haven't listened to any of that spoiler talk before.
Very, very true. I think we're ready to move into wrap-ups, yes?
Yeah, go for it.
I have to do this. I have to tiptoe through my wrap-up as to not give anything away. I very recently, for a while, but even more recently, I've really been enjoying period pieces, and that's mostly in the form of TV series or TV movies, Amazon Prime stuff. And so this came along at a perfect time where I'm kind of really into fiction that took place, 150 years ago or whatever. And I've read other historical fiction. I just don't know how much historical fiction I've read that had a supernatural bend to it. The Donner Party story lends itself to that because it's kind of weird, right? Like, people wind up eating each other. Like that's not a far, cannibalism is not a far stretch from moving into the supernatural as far as I'm concerned. It happened. It happens still, I'm sure, to this day in some parts of the world. But it was for me, it was really interesting to go on a journey with these folks and see what kind of challenges they had and what the times meant for things like relationships and people's stations in life and like the hierarchy of who gets to make the decisions and what that's based on. And then obviously you've got the Stantons in this book that are the voice of reason, even when everybody else is kind of, trying to muddle their way through it. Katsu did a great job at building anxiety. So we talked a lot, spoiler talk, about the end and how, from a historical standpoint, a lot of us know that the Donner Party did not end well. We'll leave it at that. But through the course of the book, as their journey kind of disintegrates or becomes something completely different than what they thought it was going to be, She did a great job kind of building that anxiety. And I was anxious at parts. There'd be a group that says, well, we're going to split off and go for help. And something deep inside me was like, no, no, this is bad. Like, you don't do that. You know what I mean? And she did a good job of making me, yell in my head at the characters that they're making a bad decision. The supernatural stuff. I'm not really sure where I land on the supernatural stuff in this book. There's a great, brilliant scene right towards the very end that's pretty much attributed to that. And the scene on its own outside of the book is phenomenal. But overall, I'm not sold on the way the story was told. So I think there were a lot of great elements. I think she's a great writer. I think character development was terrific. I mean, the prose was great. It didn't lack any of that. It just kind of missed the mark for me, and I guess on what I was hoping to get out of a supernatural horror fiction, historical fiction book. So when I weigh all that and I pull out the calculator, the same one I figured out, by the way, you were right, 80% was correct. I did do the math on that. Using the same calculator, this is going to come in at 3.25 stars for me.
There just weren't enough of those Tamsin dinners in the story for you.
It's very true. Very, very true.
I don't know why I latched onto that joke. I just thought it was great. This is going to be an interesting one to kind of wrap up, because even as Livius was saying his wrap up, I was really still solidifying my thoughts on the book. And overall, if I were to tell someone about it, like if someone said, hey, what's the last book you read? Which happens a lot on dating sites, because I talk about books in my profiles. Mm-hmm. And so like, hey, what's the latest book? And I should just take that shit out, because I don't want to have to fucking explain all the time. Like, let them discover later that I review books or whatever. But anyway, if I had that question, I feel like I would speak very favorably about the book. And it's because I feel like Katsu did a great job of taking an infamous story from the history of the United States in a period that is pretty far removed from us now, and creating a good narrative of that story with great character development. I feel like one of the best parts of the book is how invested I got in the major characters that were presented. And so a lot of favorable things about this book. I think that along with Livius, I'm going to kind of side with him on the whole supernatural thing didn't hit the way that I would hope. And it wasn't that I was looking for, and I don't think Livius was either. I wasn't looking for like some weird gore fest or something like that. It's just the way that it was layered into the story, I felt was a little bit off the mark. But again, could just be me and Livius had a specific reaction to it. I thought that it might be good with a little bit more ambiguity about what was going on. And I hope that doesn't spoil anything. So anyway, great, narrative. I feel like it was a very good use of a historical real life event as a setting for the story that she wanted to tell. And the character development, by far the absolute best part of the book, incorporating themes that even happen today, like the fear of coming out as gay and stuff like that. Historically, I didn't know the word faggot as a gay slur went back that far in history, but that was definitely used in the book. So that was a little surprise to me.
Yeah, I did. I had forgotten about it until you said it, but yeah, I thought the same thing. It was in like Teamsters. It caught me a little off guard.
But I will say, in reading her afterwards, she did say a good amount about what kind of, first of all, research went into writing a book like this, but also the people who she had fact-checking for historical accuracy and stuff like that. So I'm going to just go ahead and assume, since it made it into the book, that's historically accurate. And I don't know, it makes me want to go back and watch like Deadwood or something and see if anything like that came up in there. But anyway, I'm kind of getting off the point. Very good story, well characterized, an interesting supernatural element that I don't know, you could like as well. So overall, I'm going to give this 3.75 stars just to be weird like Livius.
All right.
You're doing the math. I know you're doing the math.
No, it's 3.5. But I was looking at some Amazon reviews because I was thinking, like, are we off the mark? And I'm just trying to figure this one out. So I'm going to go through this, and you may edit this out if it's not. So it's a 1-star review from Shoban. I always have trouble with this name, and it's coming up more and more. Yes, thank you. Shoban, right?
Is it Siobhan
yes,
or whatever?
Yep,
Chiffon. Yeah. It's like Chiffon. With an F.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have greatly enjoyed Alma Katsu's The Hunger. This is a 1-star review. Okay. Why 1 star for a 5-star book? I have greatly enjoyed Alma Katsu's The Hunger. Characterization, suspense, plotting, and historical verisimilitude. I've never
verisimilitude.
Thank you. I see. I can't say it even after you said it. Have been generally excellent. So why 1 star? Chapter 30 begins 1831 through the window of his grandfather's Victorian, and then in parentheses brackets it says house. Someone for the love of God informed the author that as Victoria was not yet Queen of England in 1831, there were no houses at the time known as Victorians. This refers to a style of the 1880s. His grandfather's Victorian is adding insult to injury. His grandfather would have been born in the 18th century. Such a glaring anachronism, yet the author clearly did her research about the Donner Party. Fire your editor. Wow. This is somebody that should never have a book review podcast. Because, I mean, if that's what takes a great book from 5 to 1 star, that's fucking brutal.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's one of those things, though. Like, that's like like if you're a grammar Nazi.
Sure.
Which I think that the term grammar Nazi is a little harsh. Let's take the word Nazi out of it. Like if you're just like a really harsh on people,
I think it's perfectly okay to punch grammar Nazis right in the face. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Wow. That's one of those things where it's like, obviously this person is passionate about something, and it's an insult to them personally that it's just not represented properly. And I get it. I'm that asshole a lot. But for seeing this particular asshole, it's like, dude, just calm down a little bit.
Well, it's just, I caught it, because the first thing I saw was, I have greatly enjoyed the book, but it's a 1-star review. And I'm like, did this person just click the wrong? Like, but then I read this and I'm like, wow, that's pretty fucking significant. Like, holy shit. I mean, the number of typos that we've seen, and sometimes it's because of ARCs, but there have been fully published books.
Yeah.
Big 5 publishers. And I know sometimes you mention it. I don't like. To me, it would have to really take me out of the story. It would have to be that bad. So this person who knows their houses, apparently real estate agent of some sort, I guess. I don't know.
They belong to like a historical society or something.
This book, by the way, 3.9 stars. So just a tad higher on Amazon than we came in.
Hey, good for us or them or whoever.
Yeah. So here's the question, Rob, and I want you to think about this. And we talked a lot in Spoiler Talk about a different situation that I'm not going to cover here. But would you do it? Would you eat, I don't know, like a thigh from like one of your coworkers if you were in some kind of situation where that's all you had left for sustenance and you were dying? Like,
I'm glad I listened to the whole thing, because it was just like, would you do it to try it? That's a different question than would you do it or die?
All right. Well, okay. But to be fair, all right, I'll follow up question. Would you do it just cause? Like it's literally. Well, if you've been following the news, there's this cruise ship that's been hit really hard by storms
in outside Norway.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like, if it's day one of that storm, like, and you're like, oh, someone got hit in the head with a thing. We're not sure if we have enough food, so we're considering if we run out of food, would you eat one of your fellow shipmates? And you're like, well, I'll just do it now. Like, that's one question, I guess. But the other one is, if this is it, man, like you're starting to get, I don't know what you would develop from not eating, but you're getting to the point where this is the only way to survive. How hard of a decision would that be for you to make?
So if I'm like, I feel like if I was in the Donner Party, I'd be like, well, I'm just going to eat because everybody else already is. Like just a bandwagon kind of thing. No, I'll take your question seriously. I feel like I would. I feel like in that situation, unless there were zombies outside, then I'd be like, well, I'm going to die because there's zombies outside. But if it was just like eat people or die, I feel like I would.
Yeah.
I wouldn't just because someone got hit in the head by a thing, like you said.
It sounds like I would qualify.
Well, they're going to go to waste.
But, well, yeah, you don't want to, waste not, want not. No, I mean, it's weird, man. Like, I don't even know how much trouble I would have with it, to be honest. Like, we live in a world, you and I live in a world where, like, we've probably never known, like, legit hunger, right? Like, maybe at work you didn't get to take lunch. You know what I mean?
Right.
The vast majority of people do not go hungry to the point where, like, eating weird shit comes up. Like, you may have to eat stuff that maybe is a little past its expiration date, or, man, this bread's kind of stale, but I'm hungry and I've got sandwich meat. So, but I don't even know that it would be like, we think about it and it's horrific. And obviously it's not something I want to do as a delicacy because I'm traveling to some other part of the world, or whatever. But yeah, I think the vast majority of people probably wouldn't have as much of a problem with it as we think we would.
In that desperate moment, obviously you're also just not going to be thinking, like, you're going to be so consumed with the idea of just, I need to eat something, that, like, rational thought is definitely not on the menu at the moment anyway. So I feel like that when you're in the situation, the decision process has to be entirely separately, because, like, right now, man, I ate pretty well before we started recording this, and I've got, like, a nice beer in front of me. So human flesh is, like, weeks away.
Yeah, at least. So anyway. Yeah, I mean, and again, I don't even know under what situation. I mean, I guess today there are those people who, like, get lost hiking and stuff, where there's search parties out for days looking for people. So, I mean, I guess it could, in theory, happen. Today, it seems far less likely than in a time where, like, the fastest thing you could have was a horse.
Yeah. I guess here's my question back to you then. Would you, in a situation, do the father, son, holy rabbit scenario? Do you remember that story?
Yeah, I do. I don't know if I want to spoil that for anybody. God, that's really tough.
I absolutely think I would.
Yeah, I mean, probably. Yeah, I mean, look, I'll tell you that I'm in a situation, like, in not, like, currently, but I mean, in my life where, like, I don't even want to think about it enough. You know what I mean? But yeah, sure. I probably would.
Yeah. For anybody who wants to know what we're talking about, check out the Stephen Graham Jones story, Father, Son, Holy Rabbit, which is in, I think, a couple different anthologies that are floating around out there.
For sure. All right, are we going to put a fork in the hunger?
Good job there. Yeah, I think so.
All right.
But we got some other stuff to talk about this time.
Well, we had some other stuff to talk about last time. We were just like 20 minutes too late to cover really super relevant stuff.
I don't know if I properly expressed to you how fucking annoying it is when this happens. So last week we posted the inspection review, and we were super careful to make sure that it was edited and posted in a timely fashion so that the review would drop when the book dropped, so that, people had an opportunity to hear our review, like, as fresh as possible. And what happened because of that, Livius?
We were, I think it's 40 minutes too late to cover a number of things that happened. So at the end of the last episode, for anybody that listened, I was like, really want to know where Josh is going to go next. I'm really worried that he's playing in too many genres. Blah, 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 blah. Well, it didn't take very long to find the answers to all of those questions via a Facebook post from Josh Malerman himself.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm excited about and interested to see how this plays out is that he officially announced that in October he will be releasing Mallory, which is a book about the main character from Bird Box, taking place in the Bird Box world, I guess. But my impression is it's not necessarily like a direct sequel. But you know what I'm saying? But it takes place after Bird Box.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously Mallory's in it. Yeah. And we are going to, the Vindication, so good. Expect to hear clips eventually when we have Josh on from me asking Josh, like, come on, you know what the monsters wanted, right? Him like ducking the question and me challenging him on it to saying, we're going to shed more light on the monsters. That son of a bitch knew. He knew the whole fucking time, Rob. That's all I'm saying. He knew the entire time what those monsters were up to. And that's why we have a sequel.
You're going to borrow like David James Keaton's like tape recorder so that you can like click play at key moments.
Yes. Do you remember when you said this? And I'm going to play it and be like, how about now? What do you got to say now about that? But yeah, I mean, he said it was a sequel to Bird Box. So I'm comfortable with it being a sequel. It's going to be interesting to see what he means by that. Will this pick up where the story left off? Will it be many years in the future? Will it be kind of during? Will we see more Mallory? So Bird Box had that then and now scenario. So we saw we'll call it the outbreak, and then, 5 years later, I believe it was 4 years later, whatever it was, you know what I mean? Will we see a back and forth? It'll be interesting to see. I mean, strike while the iron's hot. That's what I say. So Bird Box, huge success as a movie, rocketed back onto the New York Times bestseller list. This is I imagine, and I could be wrong, but I imagine Malerman sitting at home the day it comes on Netflix. He watches it. He's super excited, right? He sees it. Then he starts seeing all the social media around it. And he realizes it's not just people he knows, that it's people. And he's like, I've got to go. I grabs his laptop and goes up to his, his little writing room and just starts banging out the sequel. That's how I'm picturing this went down.
He goes back to, remember he was telling us when he was writing Bird Box, he was in that like weird mansion with like the really open like ballroom that he was writing in, and the birds were flying around.
Yeah.
Maybe those birds are still there.
They could be. But yeah, he was like, oh, do I have an idea? So good for him. But I'm excited. But that's not the only news that popped like over the course of the next few hours after that.
Yeah, because like the other thing was, so we knew that Unbury Carol had gotten an option to be a movie in the past. So that was something that we were already aware of. But apparently also Black Mad Wheel now, right, is optioned to be a movie.
Correct. Yes.
So that's awesome news. But again, news we got, after we had finished recording our episode. So it's just going to be all Malerman from here on out, apparently.
Well, and the same company that's that's going to be making Black Mad Wheel also has an original script from him called Only Children. So that's super interesting because that would mean a new Malerman story. So Bird Box, Unbury Carol, Mallory's a sequel, but this is an original new story that's not something that we're already somewhat familiar with. So yeah, a lot of exciting stuff happening for Josh, and a really nice guy. I mean, couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
For sure. That's not the only news though. Livius and I did something very uncommon last night from when we were recording this.
Well, we're not going to talk about that on the podcast.
No, I'm talking about we hung out.
Oh, yeah, we totally hung out.
So I'm not talking about the Tamsin dinner that we had together. No, we actually got together in person and spent time together because friend of the podcast, Rob Roberge, is in Chicago living now. And so we went and spent a little time, a couple hours hanging out with Rob and just catching up on things, which was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool to so we met Rob previously twice. Once was at a book signing, just kind of a, hey, looking forward to reading your book, sign this book. And we were at AWP. And then he was at a reading in Chicago a while ago. It was 4 years ago, I think. And we hung out for a little bit afterwards. I think we were kind of all outside smoking at the time, and whatever. But this time we got to hang out, and it was really good to get to know him a little better, and to kind of get a little bit more of an insight into him as a person. And I'm super happy that we did it. It was terrific.
Yeah, one of the things I like most about those, like when we get to hang out with the authors, especially like not even if we've necessarily reviewed them or read their books, but just like they have a different perspective in the industry than we do, but we have so many similar thoughts about things because we've kind of witnessed the same things. And so it's cool to have an author's take on some of the things that we've been talking about and it's cool to see an author's reaction to some of the thoughts that we have about things. And so from that perspective, it was just cool to catch up on things. But at the same time, it was cool to just hang out with a friend.
Yeah, all that was great, but really Rob's bearing the lead because there's also an announcement to be made here.
Yeah, so anybody that's Chicago local who's listening to this, Saturday, April 6th, 7 p.m., Volumes Book Cafe in Wicker Park. Rob Roberge is doing a release, like a book release party for the paperback version of his memoir, Liar. And he was nice enough to ask me to join the event where I will be doing a little Q&A with him as part of the event.
Yeah, I don't want to give any details away, but it's not going to be just a reading. So there's some other cool things happening there. So it sounds like a lot of fun. And for sure, if you're in the Chicago area, you should definitely make your way down there. It looks like an interesting place. We were looking at pictures of it online before we recorded this. So it definitely looks like it might be a cool place to hang out and nothing else, get to meet the Robs, the two Robs in my life, Rob Olson and Rob Roberge.
Yeah, looking forward to it. I think this is the first time I've done a book-related event sans Livius, and so it's a little bit different. The interesting note, Volumes Book Cafe on their website said that we would be recording the event even before we had even considered recording the event, so I may kind of you know what? I'm not going to guarantee it. You got to come out. You got to come out and see the event.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a good time. And if for nothing else, shake Rob Roberge's hand. He's a really cool dude. So yeah, it's you on your own, man. Like, I'm wondering if this is going to be like where you're just doing a book review podcast on your own after this. Like, if you figured out that you don't need me anymore for stuff.
Like I do like a Fergie thing with Black Eyed Peas, and I just kind of roll. I don't even know if that's an appropriate reference, but
well, I mean, it is, right? Like she became more,
she was
more popular on her own, than she was with them, and she was still like doing stuff with them. So yeah, it could be. All I know is that I'm pretty sure that if it wasn't me like messaging you about times and stuff, that it might take you longer to get around to reviewing books than I feel like a lot of times. I'm like, you're like, fuck, this guy's going to be pissed if I'm not done with this book. So
that's true.
I might be a motivating factor in getting these reviews done. So
yeah, I think I do some of my best. Like, my most productivity comes out of like fearing I'll disappoint someone.
Yeah, there you go.
So
listen, we all have our things, right, that get us through the day. And if fear of disappointing others is yours, if it's photo, then
it's very good, sir. Very good.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it. Next week, we're not reading a book.
Next week we'll be telling you about all the shit that came out right after we finished recording this.
Exactly. Yeah. Now I go on a 2-hour binge to find out what's newsworthy after we're done. So but yeah, there will definitely be an episode next week. There's also going to be an appearance, I think, forthcoming on Seth Harwood's podcast on his Patreon. So that'll be interesting. It's been a long time since Rob and I have graced another podcast with our presence. It's been years, as a matter of fact. I think the last time was it was probably This Is Horror or Books, Beer, and Bullshit, right?
Did we? Yeah, I was going to say. I forgot Books, Beer, and Bullshit. That was after This Is Horror, so that's the newest one.
Yep. So that's something you may want to look at. We haven't confirmed a time, but Seth is down and we're down, so we're going to go loan our sultry voices to somebody else's airwaves for a little bit. So that'll be fun. Who knows? There might be a recording of the Rob Roberge reading coming up. Next week is kind of a big deal for us, so we'll talk more about that next week. And that's all I've got, Rob.
All right, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, I'm Rob Olson.
And I'm Livius Nutton. Keep reading.
Sorry, I was taking a picture of the foam on my beer.
Oh, well, I mean, that's all right. That's cool.
I'm going to show you. It's great. I think it's worthy of interrupting the talk. I'm going to send it to you. You're like, fuck you, Rob.
I'm just like, it's cool. Sometimes I do my taxes while we're recording. So I mean, we all have things we do.
You doing your taxes right now?
No, but I haven't done my taxes, and I probably need to.
Tell me if you see a pattern in the bubbles.
All right, let me blow this up a little bit. Yeah, I could see that kind of like spooky, ghostly, 2 eyes, wide open mouth. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Right. And so